Behind some of Hollywood's most iconic faces were stories marked by heartbreak, loss, and personal battles. Today, we revisit the lives, deaths, and final photographs of 10 legendary actors. Marlon Brando is still widely considered the greatest screen actor who ever lived. 2 Academy Awards, a career that redefined what film performance could be, and a personal life that unraveled so completely that by the end, his name was associated less with The Godfather than with murder, suicide, and a body that had grown to over 300 pounds. He was born in Omaha, Nebraska in 1924. Both parents were alcoholics. His father was physically abusive and cold. Brando later wrote that nothing he ever did pleased or even interested the man. His mother was a stage actress who was frequently absent and drunk when present. He described caring for her as a child, learning to imitate animals to distract her from drinking. He was expelled from school, rejected by the military, and eventually found his way to New York and the stage, where everything changed. His performances in A Streetcar Named Desire on Broadway and then on film made him the most talked-about actor of his generation. The Godfather in 1972 won him his second Oscar. But by then, the man off-screen was already in serious trouble. 3 marriages had collapsed. He had fathered at least 11 children across multiple relationships, and by most accounts was distant, domineering, and intermittently cruel to them all. At Christian's sentencing for manslaughter in 1991, Brando stood up in court and wept, saying, "I think perhaps I failed as a father." The manslaughter charge came after his son Christian shot and killed his half-sister Cheyenne's boyfriend in the living room of Brando's Mulholland Drive house. Cheyenne, who had long struggled with her mental health, died by suicide in 1995 while Christian was still in prison. Brando was reportedly told of her death while at home and collapsed to the floor. He had once called her the most precious thing in his life. His health deteriorated steadily through the late 1990s. He developed diabetes, then pulmonary fibrosis, and was increasingly dependent on oxygen. A co-star later recalled Brando riding around Michael Jackson's Neverland Ranch in a golf cart fitted with a portable oxygen tank because his lungs were too weak to walk the grounds. Weeks before his death, he refused to have tubes inserted into his lungs, knowing it was the only thing that might prolong his life. The last known photograph shows him in a wheelchair, obese and visibly ill, led by his daughter. He died on July 1, 2004, of respiratory failure in Los Angeles. He was 80. His ashes were scattered in Tahiti and Death Valley. Charlie Chaplin became the most recognizable person on earth, playing a lovable tramp with worn-out shoes and a borrowed dignity. The character was not entirely fiction. He knew what it was to go hungry, to sleep rough, and to have no one looking out for him. He was born in South London in 1889 to 2 music hall performers who separated early. His father was an alcoholic who provided nothing. His mother, Hannah, struggled to keep the boys fed until she couldn't. Chaplin was sent to the Lambeth workhouse at 7 years old. When he was 14, his mother developed psychosis, brought on by syphilis and malnutrition, and was committed to Cane Hill Asylum. Chaplin and his brother Sidney were left alone, scavenging for food and occasionally sleeping on the streets. Hannah remained in institutional care for the rest of her life, dying in 1928. Chaplin later wrote, "There was nothing we could do but accept poor mother's fate." He performed his way out of poverty, reached Hollywood, and by the 1920s was the most famous entertainer in the world. He was also a man whose personal conduct was repeatedly indefensible. He married 4 times, twice to girls who were 16 years old. His second marriage, to Lita Gray, came after he got her pregnant on set. He was 35. She was 16. The marriage was conducted in secret in Mexico to avoid a statutory rape charge. The divorce in 1927 cost him nearly $1 million and generated the most sensational court proceedings Hollywood had seen. His political views eventually cost him everything else. He had been under FBI surveillance since the 1920s, suspected of communist sympathies. In 1952, while sailing to Europe for the premiere of Limelight, the U.S. government revoked his re-entry permit. He settled in Switzerland with his fourth wife, Una O'Neill, and their 8 children, and did not return to America for 20 years. When he finally came back in 1972 to receive an honorary Oscar, the Academy gave him the longest standing ovation in its history. In his final years, he suffered strokes and declining health, cared for by Una at their home in Corsier-sur-Vevey. The last photograph, taken in October 1977, shows him in a wheelchair, 88 years old, led by Una through the grounds. He died on Christmas Day, 1977, of respiratory failure. 2 months later, his body was stolen from the grave by 2 men who attempted to ransom it back to the family. It was recovered 11 weeks later in a field nearby. James Dean made 3 films. He lived to see one of them released. He was 24 years old when he died, and in the 70 years since, his face has never stopped appearing on posters, t-shirts, and walls around the world. No actor in Hollywood history has done more with less time. He was born in Marion, Indiana in 1931. His father, Winton, was a cold and distant man who struggled to connect with his son. His mother, Mildred, was the center of his world, the only person, Dean said, who ever truly understood him. She died of uterine cancer when he was 9. His father put him on a train back to Indiana with his grandmother in his mother's coffin and did not follow. Dean was sent to live with his aunt and uncle on a Quaker farm and did not see his father again until he was 18. Friends who knew him in Hollywood said that wound never closed, that everything he did on screen, the need and the rage and the hunger for something just out of reach, came directly from that abandonment. He made his way to New York in the early 1950s, got accepted to the Actors Studio under Lee Strasberg, and within a few years had been cast in East of Eden by Elia Kazan. Kazan later said he chose Dean precisely because the role required a son desperate for his father's love, and Dean wasn't acting. The film was released in March 1955. Rebel Without a Cause followed in October. Giant was still in post-production when he died. He was also a serious racing driver, competing in road races throughout 1955 alongside his film work. On September 30th, 1955, he was driving his Porsche 550 Spyder, which he had nicknamed Little Bastard, to a race in Salinas, California. He was pulled over for speeding at 3:30 in the afternoon. 2 hours later, at a junction near Colame, a Ford sedan turned across his path. The collision was nearly head-on. Dean's neck was broken. He was pronounced dead at 5:45 p.m. The last photograph shows him beside Little Bastard on the morning of September 30th, relaxed, squinting in the sun, hours from the end. He was posthumously nominated for 2 Academy Awards, making him the only actor ever to receive 2 posthumous nominations. The coffin at his funeral was kept closed. Clark Gable was called the King of Hollywood, and for much of the 1930s the title was hard to argue with. Gone with the Wind, It Happened One Night, Mutiny on the Bounty. He was the biggest male star of his era, the kind of presence that entire productions were built around. He was also a man the industry never quite recovered after losing Carole Lombard, and who spent the rest of his life trying to fill a gap that couldn't be filled. He was born in Cadiz, Ohio, in 1901. His mother died when he was an infant. His father was cold and largely indifferent. He dropped out of school at 16, drifted through odd jobs and small theatrical roles, and married his first wife, an acting coach named Josephine Dillon, who was 17 years older than him, largely because she believed in him and helped get him to Hollywood. His second marriage was to a wealthy socialite. Neither relationship had much warmth in it. Then there was Carole Lombard. They married in 1939, and by most accounts, it was the only period of his life in which he was genuinely happy. She was sharp, funny, and completely unimpressed by the king of Hollywood persona, calling him Pa or Mr. G. In January 1942, Lombard flew home from an Indiana war bond drive that had raised over $2 million in a single day. Her plane crashed into a Nevada mountainside. There were no survivors. Gable, who had been waiting at the airport in Burbank to meet her, was driven to Las Vegas and spent 2 days unshaven and sleepless while search parties retrieved the bodies. Friends said he was never quite the same. That August, at 41, well past the age he needed to serve, he enlisted in the Army Air Corps, flying combat missions over Germany as a tail gunner. Some who knew him thought it was a death wish. He came home, kept making films, married twice more. His fourth wife bore a resemblance to Lombard. It was noticed by everyone. None of it filled the absence. By the late 1950s, his health was deteriorating. Heavy smoking, hypertension, a body he had pushed hard for decades. In 1960, he took the lead in The Misfits alongside Marilyn Monroe, insisting on doing his own stunts in the Nevada desert heat, including scenes wrestling a horse to the ground. 2 days after filming Wrapped, he suffered a massive heart attack. He was taken to Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital, appeared to stabilize, then died suddenly on November 16, 1960. He was 59. The last photograph shows him with Marilyn Monroe on the set of The Misfits, the two of them embracing after the final day of shooting. Both would be dead within 2 years. He was buried beside Carole Lombard at Forest Lawn, as he had requested. Buster Keaton made films in the 1920s that critics still struggle to fully explain. The stunts were real, the camera work was decades ahead of its time, and the deadpan expression that never broke became one of the most recognizable faces in cinema history. Roger Ebert called his silent film period the greatest sustained run of any actor-director in movie history. By the time anyone said that publicly, Keaton had spent the better part of 20 years broke, institutionalized, and forgotten. He was born in 1895 in Piqua, Kansas, into a vaudeville family. His nickname came from Harry Houdini, who watched the 18-month-old tumble down a flight of stairs unhurt and called it a real buster. His father incorporated him into the act at age 4, throwing him around the stage as part of a deliberately rough physical comedy routine. Keaton learned to fall, land, and get up without flinching. His father was an alcoholic, and by the time Keaton was 21, the drinking had made his father unreliable enough to break up the act. His silent film career ran from 1920 to 1928 and produced a body of work, The General, Sherlock Jr., The Cameraman, that still holds up against anything made since. Then in 1928, he made the decision that destroyed the next decade of his life. He signed with MGM and gave up creative control. The studio assigned him to mediocre comedies alongside Jimmy Durante and managed him like a product. His marriage to Natalie Talmadge collapsed, and she was awarded custody of their 2 sons and changed their surname to Talmadge. He was barred from seeing them for years. MGM fired him in 1933. He filed for bankruptcy the following year, listing total assets of $12,000. The drinking that followed was severe enough to have him briefly institutionalized. He escaped a straitjacket using techniques he had learned from Houdini. In 1933, during what he later described as an alcoholic blackout, he married a nurse named May Scriven. He claimed to remember nothing about the ceremony. She divorced him 2 years later. His third wife, Eleanor Norris, whom he married in 1940, is credited by almost everyone who knew him with saving his life. His career revived slowly through the 1950s, and he received an honorary Oscar in 1959. He was still working in 1965, filming The Railroader in Canada, apparently unaware that his doctors had diagnosed him with lung cancer and elected not to tell him. The last photograph shows Keaton on the set of The Railroader in 1966, still on the job. He died on February 1st, 1966, of lung cancer at home in his sleep. His wife said he played cards with friends the night before. James Stewart is remembered as Hollywood's everyman. The drawl, the loping walk, the decent small-town idealism of George Bailey and Jefferson Smith. The American Film Institute ranked him the third greatest male actor in cinema history. What most people watching It's a Wonderful Life every December don't know is that when Stewart filmed those scenes of George Bailey unraveling and contemplating suicide, he wasn't entirely acting. He had come home from the war a broken man. He was born in Indiana, Pennsylvania in 1908, the son of a hardware store owner he idolized. At 33, just after winning the Oscar for The Philadelphia Story, he enlisted in the Army Air Corps. The military tried to keep him out of combat. He was too valuable a propaganda asset, but Stewart refused desk duty and assigned himself to every bombing mission he could. He flew over 20 combat runs over Germany in a B-24 Liberator. In one mission alone, his group lost 13 planes and 130 men, most of whom he knew personally. By the end of the war, he had been grounded for what was then called being flak happy, what we now call PTSD. He returned home having lost significant weight, barely sleeping, plagued by nightmares of planes exploding and men falling through the air. His acting career, everyone assumed, was finished. Frank Capra offered him It's a Wonderful Life. The cast and crew noticed during filming that in the scenes where George Bailey comes apart, screaming at his family, weeping at a bar, Stewart wasn't performing. The war was coming through on film. The movie restored his career and went on to become one of the most watched films in American history, which carries its own strange irony given what it cost him personally to make it. He married Gloria McLean in 1949, adopted her 2 sons, and by most accounts finally found stability. Then in June 1969, his adopted son Ronald, a Marine Corps lieutenant 24 years old, was killed in Vietnam while shielding a wounded teammate during an ambush. Stewart said in interviews for the rest of his life that not a day passed without thinking of him. In 1994, Gloria died of lung cancer. Stewart retreated almost entirely into his bedroom, seeing only his children, refusing most visitors. In December 1996, he declined to have his pacemaker battery replaced. The last interview shows him at 89, still recognizably himself. He died on July 2, 1997, of a heart attack following a pulmonary embolism at home in Beverly Hills. His last words, spoken to his family around him, were, "I'm going to be with Gloria now." The American Film Institute named Humphrey Bogart the greatest male star in the history of classic Hollywood cinema. Not second, not third, first. Casablanca, The Maltese Falcon, The African Queen, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. 4 of those films made the AFI's all-time greatest movies list simultaneously. He achieved all of it in a career that didn't really take off until he was in his 40s, after a decade of grinding through forgettable roles and 2 failed marriages, and he died at 57 with cigarettes still in his hand. He was born on Christmas Day 1899 in Manhattan, the son of a surgeon and a celebrated commercial illustrator. The household was cold and financially comfortable in equal measure. His parents fought constantly and showed their children little warmth. He was expelled from the prestigious Phillips Academy for smoking and drinking, served briefly in the Navy, and drifted into acting on Broadway with no particular plan. Hollywood called in the early 1930s and mostly wasted him for a decade in minor roles before The Maltese Falcon in 1941 changed everything. He married 4 times. The first 2 ended badly and publicly. The third, to actress Mayo Methot, was so volatile, mutual drinking, screaming fights, physical altercations, that the press nicknamed them the Dazzling Bogarts. Then in 1944, on the set of To Have and Have Not, he met Lauren Bacall. She was 19. He was 44. They married the following year, and by most accounts, it was the only genuinely happy chapter of his personal life. They had 2 children and spent their free time on his yacht, the Santana. He said she was the one thing he got right. He had smoked 2 packs a day for most of his adult life and drank heavily throughout. By the early 1950s, the damage was visible. He refused to see a doctor until January 1956, when Bacall finally persuaded him. The diagnosis was esophageal cancer. In March 1956, surgeons removed his esophagus, 2 lymph nodes, and a rib in a 9.5-hour operation. It did not work. A second surgery in November accomplished nothing. By the end, he weighed 80 pounds, could not eat, and was too weak to climb stairs. Even then, he kept smoking, switching only from unfiltered Chesterfields to filtered cigarettes. The day before he died, Frank Sinatra, Katharine Hepburn, and Spencer Tracy came to his bedside. When Tracy said goodnight, Bogart quietly covered his hand and said, "Goodbye, Spence." Tracy understood immediately. The photograph from around 1956 shows him gaunt and visibly ill. Still Bogart, but a shadow of the man on the screen. He died on January 14, 1957, of esophageal cancer, at home in Holmby Hills. He was 57. Spencer Tracy won 2 consecutive Academy Awards for Best Actor, 1937 and 1938, a record that stood for 60 years. Katharine Hepburn, who knew him better than almost anyone, later wrote that she never fully understood the depths of his despair. "Never at peace," she said, "tortured by some sort of guilt, some terrible misery." He was born in Milwaukee in 1900 into a devout Irish Catholic family with a history of alcoholism on his father's side. He married actress Louise Treadwell in 1923, and they had 2 children. When their first son John was born deaf, Tracy became convinced it was a punishment for his sins. The guilt never left him. Rather than draw him closer to his family, it drove him away from them, into hotel rooms, benders that lasted weeks, affairs with a string of actresses including Loretta Young and Ingrid Bergman. Louise remained his wife in name for the rest of his life, telling people she would be Mrs. Spencer Tracy until the day she died. His alcoholism was severe enough to get him fired from Fox in the mid-1930s after a 2-week binge left him unconscious in a hotel room. MGM picked him up and managed him more carefully, but the drinking continued throughout his career. 10-day benders that shut down productions, hospitalizations, detox. He took barbiturates to sleep and stimulants to work, a cycle that steadily wore down his body and contributed to the chronic depression and insomnia that plagued him throughout his adult life. He met Katharine Hepburn in 1942 on the set of Woman of the Year. The relationship lasted 25 years and was an open secret in Hollywood. He refused to divorce Louise on Catholic grounds, which meant Hepburn spent a quarter-century in a love affair she could never acknowledge publicly. In his final years, she moved into his home and cared for him as his health collapsed. Pulmonary edema, hypertensive heart disease, diabetes, kidney failure so severe that in 1965 he spent a night in a coma. In 1967, visibly frail and dependent on oxygen, he agreed to make one last film with Hepburn. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? Near the end of the shoot, Tracy filmed a long soliloquy about enduring love. It took a week to complete. In the background, Hepburn can be seen crying. She was not acting. When he finished, the crew gave him a standing ovation. It was the last scene he ever filmed. He died 17 days later, on June 10, 1967, of a heart attack at home in Beverly Hills. He was 67. Hepburn was in the house when it happened. She did not attend the funeral, out of respect for Louise and his children. Cary Grant was the most elegant man in Hollywood, poised, witty, impeccably dressed, effortlessly charming in a way that made the whole thing look like something he was born with. He was not born with it. He built it from scratch deliberately over decades as a way of escaping a childhood he spent most of his life trying to forget. He was born Archibald Leach in Bristol, England in 1904. His older brother had died in infancy. His father was a heavy drinker, largely absent. When Archie was 11, his mother simply disappeared from the family home. His father told him she had gone away. He would not discover until he was in his 30s that she had been committed to a mental asylum, and that she had been alive the entire time he believed her to be dead. He later said that revelation broke something open in him and explained a great deal about why he had always felt so fundamentally alone. He left school at 14, joined an acrobatic troupe, sailed to America, reinvented himself as Cary Grant, and by the 1930s was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. Hitchcock used him repeatedly because he understood, instinctively, that Grant's real gift was playing a man running from something he couldn't name. He never won an Oscar competitively, a fact the Academy acknowledged by giving him an honorary award in 1970. 5 marriages, all of them failures. The first ended with accusations of domestic violence. His 4th wife, Diane Cannon, alleged in court that he was controlling and had pressured her to take LSD. Grant did not deny the drug use. Between 1958 and 1961, he took LSD roughly 100 times in therapeutic sessions, crediting it with helping him finally forgive his parents and confront the damage his childhood had done. He described his pre-LSD self as a self-opinionated boor, hiding behind layers of hypocrisy and vanity. He retired from acting in 1966, became a father for the first time at 62, and spent his final years in what his biographer called genuine contentment, relieved at last not to have to be Cary Grant every day. In November 1986, at 82, he was on tour with a one-man show called A Conversation with Cary Grant. The last photograph shows him with his 5th wife, Barbara Harris, on the afternoon of November 29th in Davenport, Iowa, a few hours before the show. He complained of feeling unwell during rehearsals, went back to the hotel, and died later that night of a massive stroke. The time was 11:22 p.m. Henry Fonda spent 6 decades playing decent men. Principled, plain-spoken, quietly heroic. Juror 8 in 12 Angry Men. Tom Joad in The Grapes of Wrath. The kind of screen presence that made audiences feel the world might still be all right. The American Film Institute named him the 6th greatest male screen legend in Hollywood history. Off-screen, by most accounts of the people who loved him, he was remote, judgmental, and very difficult to reach. He was born in Grand Island, Nebraska in 1905, the son of a printer, and made his way to Broadway and then Hollywood through sheer persistence and natural ability. He married 5 times. The second marriage, to socialite Francis Ford Seymour, lasted 13 years and produced 2 children, Jane and Peter, both of whom became successful actors in their own right. It ended when Fonda asked Francis for a divorce so he could marry a woman 20 years younger. Francis, who had been struggling with mental illness for years, checked herself into a psychiatric facility in January 1950. She died there on April 14th, on her 42nd birthday, having cut her throat with a razor. Jane was 12. Peter was 10. They were told their mother had died of a heart attack. Jane learned the truth a year later from a gossip magazine passed to her in a study hall. She later said she never fully recovered from finding out that way, and that the wound shaped the rest of her life. Her relationship with her father remained strained for decades. Fonda loathed emotional displays and, by his children's accounts, made the dinner table feel like a test they were always failing. Peter wrote in his autobiography that he never heard the words, "I love you, son," until his father was old and dying. Jane, for her part, said that even near the end, she knew better than to expect him to become someone he had never been. In 1981, with Fonda seriously ill and their relationship still unresolved, Jane bought the film rights to On Golden Pond specifically for him. The story of a cold, emotionally brittle man slowly becoming more accessible to his estranged daughter. It was not a subtle choice on her part, and she said as much. The film co-starred Katharine Hepburn and earned nearly $120 million at the box office. Fonda was too ill to attend the Academy Awards ceremony when he won Best Actor. Jane accepted on his behalf. He was 76, the oldest Best Actor winner in history. The last photograph, taken in March 1982, shows him sitting wrapped in a blanket, the Oscar resting in his lap, frail and clearly near the end. He died on August 12, 1982, of heart disease at his home in Los Angeles. Jane and Peter were at his side. He had asked that no funeral be held. His body was cremated